Good morning. I'll call to order this regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. It's September 30th, 2014. I'm Lisa Bender, the chair of the committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, council members Reich, Goodman, Andrew Johnson, and Warsami. And we're also joined by third ward council member Jacob Fry. We have 6 items on today's agenda. I'll start with the consent items, which are 4 through 6, before returning to the public hearing items 1 through 3. On consent today, we have item number 4, which is the East Side Food Co-op. It's a petition filed to rezone the properties from C1 to C2 to allow for an addition to that store. Item number 5 is Mixed Blood Theater, and that is an application to rezone the properties from R6 to OR2 to allow for the construction of a new elevator and lobby. And item number 6 is for Southwest High School in order to rezone the property from R1 to R1A to construct an addition and as well as a vacation of a utility easement. So are there any comments or discussion on the 3 consent items? Seeing none, I'll move items 4 through 6 for approval. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And those carry.
Sorry, Chair Bender. The on item 6, the requested action on the vacation was to postpone that to December 8th, but the rezoning can be moved and approved. Okay.
How do we correct our action? Do we need to vote again?
I think you can just make another vote.
Okay.
Yep.
So then substituting for item number 6, I will move to approve item A, which is the rezoning, and to continue the vacation to December 8th, Zoning and Planning Committee. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. That carries. Thank you. Okay, so we'll return to the public hearings. We have 3 items today for public hearing. The first is Pillsbury A Mill, and we'll start with staff.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is John Smoley. Very pleased to be before you this morning to brief you on an appeal of a certificate of appropriateness for 400 2nd Street Southeast. This is the Pillsbury A Mill Machine Shop Rehabilitation. A new office use is proposed for the site. This is a contributing resource in the St. Anthony Falls Historic District, our city and state's first historic district. And it's also one of 3 Minneapolis National Historic Landmarks. This is the highest designation of properties afforded to properties throughout our nation. The applicant has received 2 historic variances and a certificate of appropriateness to install rooftop and ground-mounted mechanical equipment with no screening, to amend a historic variance for the adjacent residential developments, reducing their parking allocation by 26 spaces and reassigning it to the machine shop, to structurally stabilize the southeast corner of the building, to repair and replace masonry, install new window openings, repair and replace windows and doors, install signage, replace the south wall, replace the roof, install aluminum storm windows, and replace the HVAC system. It's a very comprehensive overhaul of the building itself that appears here at the southeast corner of 2nd Street Southeast and 3rd Avenue Southeast, directly behind the historic Pillsbury A Mill, which you can see, which appears here. This is the property as it appeared historically. This is the property as it appears recently. The HPC approved these requests with conditions on August 19th, and the applicant is appealing 2 of those conditions. Those conditions are to retain the existing 2nd floor cargo door on the north side of the building, this door, and to deny the proposed removal of historic masonry and installation of 3 new windows and 1 light well that extend out into the sidewalk right here on the western side of the building at the basement level. On Friday, the appellant submitted a revised appeal statement. That has been placed in your packets. They also requested CPED issue building permits unrelated to the subject of the appeal, and CPED has granted that request. Last but not least, staff has received 4 letters, all in support of the project, and no letters in opposition. 2 of those came in recently. Those have been provided to you in your electronic packets. Okay, in regard to the disputed conditions, again, condition number 5 states that the applicant shall retain the existing 2nd floor cargo door on the north side of the building. You can see it here at an oblique angle. Historically, this was a window opening that matched the other window openings on that second floor. When replacing missing historic features, such as that window and window opening, the St. Anthony Falls Historic District Design Guidelines require applicants use replacement materials that appear similar to that of the original, and use a design that has an appearance similar to the original or one associated with a structure of a similar age. The applicant is proposing a pedestrian-style entrance, 2 double doors, aluminum double doors with a transom window overhead, where no actual means of egress exists. This is a second floor. There are no stairs that would enable office users to get down to the street level. This is really not compatible with the historic opening or the industrial cargo door currently in its place, nor do we see precedents like this on other industrial buildings in the district. Condition number 13 states that the proposed removal of historic foundation masonry and installation of 3 new windows and 1 light well that extends out into the sidewalk on the western side of the building, right here. That's not approved. Here's what the applicant is proposing instead. In addition to the new windows, there would be a window well, 3 feet 8 inches by 15 feet long, covered by a steel grate and protected by a guardrail that would prevent pedestrians on the sidewalk from falling into it. This would require an encroachment permit through Public Works because it will extend out into the sidewalk. This portion of the proposal is really not ideal from not only a historic preservation standpoint, but also from a pedestrian circulation standpoint and a solar access standpoint. As you can see from this photo and the historic photo that you saw previously, no openings currently or historically existed in this space. The St. Anthony Falls Historic District Design Guidelines, approved just 2 years ago, they prohibit new window openings on primary facades such as this, but they do permit more flexibility in secondary locations such as the south wall here, where staff recommended and the HPC approved extensive segments of ribbon windows on a new stucco wall. That's the south side of the building, right here. And here's that proposed window opening again. Sorry, it's a little hard to see with this pointer, right here. In terms of pedestrian circulation, the proposal would carve a 3 foot 8 inch by 15 foot segment out of the sidewalk. That's obviously not ideal. And in terms of solar access, while the proposed window well would provide some light into the basement, there are already 10 windows at this level on this side of the basement. You can see them here. There's a historic, or there will be new doors there with windows as well. And there is also, which you can't see in this rendering, an air conditioning unit proposed for to stand in front of this window, and that would sit out in the public right-of-way as well. Of course, staff recommends upholding the HPC's determination, which is really in the best interest of preserving and interpreting the building. But I think it's useful to just reiterate again, this is a really terrific proposal for a building that just 2 years ago, for an entire site that just 2 years ago was listed in the National Trust's 11 most endangered properties list. The success of this project is not going to be compromised, regardless of whether these conditions are removed or granted. And specifically, the applicant, we're very pleased to note that the applicant has applied for state and federal historic preservation tax credits, and the application or removal of these conditions won't impact them from receiving 40% of the cost of their substantial rehabilitation through state and federal tax credits. Nor will it really destroy the property's ability to communicate its historical significance. Staff would argue that it would impair that ability, but it won't destroy it. And last but not least, this would not nullify a lease with a prospective tenant. The applicant has made it quite clear several times that they don't have prospective tenants yet who are demanding the removal of the door in question or the installation of the windows and well in question. I'm available for any questions you may have, and I know the applicant is here and would like to speak also.
Thank you, Mr. Smoley. Does anyone have questions for staff? I have one question, Mr. Smoley, and maybe the applicant would address this as well, but was there discussion of a different door? Is there a need to replace the door for, safety reasons or something? And then has there been discussion of a different door design that would be more in keeping with the design guidelines?
Madam Chair, I defer to the applicant in that matter.
Great. Okay, let's have the, so we'll have the appellant speak first, followed by the applicant. So if the appellant is here and wants to come forward. Oh, the appellant is the applicant in this. Thank you. Sorry.
Good morning, Chairperson Bender and Commissioners. My name is Christopher Wegscheid. I'm an architect with Cermak Rhodes Architects in St. Paul, and I've been asked by Schaefer Richardson, the developer of the project, to talk a little bit about the 2 points that we're appealing here. The first, just to make a clarification, if I understood staff's comments correctly, the machine shop is a historic landmark status. My understanding is that the machine shop itself is not landmark status. The A mill proper on the riverside behind the machine shop does have landmark status, but the machine shop is not included in that designation. To talk about first the, how do I bring up this slide? To talk first about the crane door, as staff noticed, or as, there we go. Thanks. As staff mentioned, the this was not the original configuration. The original configuration of that crane door was a window similar to the adjacent windows, and this was done at some point in the 60s. A crane was added to the second floor with that little beam that sticks out, and that crane door was added. The crane door itself is just a hollow metal door. If we were doing this building today, we wouldn't put an uninsulated hollow metal door in that location because it's going to see a lot of frost with this new occupancy business going in there in the middle of winter with the heated space. It's not a weather-tight condition. It's not thermally appropriate for the occupancy. All of the other windows are being upgraded, repaired, and to have this one opening in the building that is not doesn't meet the same sort of standard that we're applying to the rest of the openings, I think will cause some long-term potential for condensation damage at that opening. I also note that the other openings on the first floor, which were also modified from an original wood door and transom openings, also received at some point in the building's life these other overhead metal doors that you can see on the first floor. And SHPO and HBC have approved us to take out those doors and replace them with upgraded doors. And it's just this one door that was denied. So from a usability standpoint, from being able to get light in through that opening, which was a feature of the building originally, to make a more weather-tight and sustainable installation, we're appealing that decision to be able to replace those doors. The other item under appeal is the inclusion of the area well and the windows on the sidewalk. Another point of clarification, staff mentioned that there was an air conditioning unit that was planned adjacent to those new windows. There is no unit planned there. I'm not sure where that point of confusion arose, but all of the mechanical systems for this building are located on the roof, as you can see in that drawing. The three windows that we are proposing here were approved by SHPO and denied by the HBC. The intent of the windows is to make the lower level of this building, which is more than half buried in the site. It's essentially a basement. It was just to bring more light into that space and make it a more desirable space for leasing. And the configuration of those windows originally had muntins to match the adjacent windows. Those were removed at the request of SHPO, who wanted these windows to be legible as a new insertion into the building and not to match the adjacent windows directly. Once the area well is added, That'll bring the possibility of more light down into the basement. The sidewalk is very wide here. Even after the inclusion of the area wall, the sidewalk is more than 13 feet wide out to the curb. So the pedestrian aspect, given the amount of traffic this part of town sees, I don't see that a 13-foot sidewalk is a serious impediment to pedestrian traffic. So, you know, from our point of view, given the upgrades that are being made to the building and the changes that are being made to the building, both of these modifications to the building, they increase the value of the building without too drastically altering the historical context. They work within the language of the building and the previous adaptations and changes that have been made to the building. If anybody has any questions.
Are there any questions? Could you address that specific question? Had you considered a different design for the door that might be more in keeping with the design guidelines?
Well, I think the let me get back to that drawing. I think we're sort of walking a fine line between responding to the existing design of the windows. This is an industrial building, but if you look at the design of these windows, it is almost a residential proportion to the windows and the way the muntins are divided. And then the doors on that we're changing down on the first floor respond very directly to what was in the building originally. So the design that we're showing for the second floor is an attempt to sort of extrapolate out of all of that existing information that we had and to not include something that was jarring or discontinuous with the rest of the fabric of the building. Having said that, there are options for doing full light doors as opposed to half light doors, muntins versus no muntins. So I don't know that there's a magic answer to that, but there's certain other options on the table that would accomplish the same intent of dealing with the historic fabric, but also allowing light and air into the second story of the building.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. So please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Amy Lucas. I'm actually also here with Schaefer Richardson. I'm with Landscape Research, and I completed the historic tax credit rehabilitation application that went to the National Park Service for this building. So I just wanted to explain a little bit about the process for the design review of historic properties. The State Historic Preservation Office has an architect certified in historic rehabilitation review, so she is certified and understands and evaluates the buildings following the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. Then after the state local review for the state tax credits, it is forwarded with a recommendation to the National Park Service, where they also have an architect who specializes in historic rehabs. They do have a pragmatic approach to the buildings, and we did sit down with the local office on this building, and they did review the entire interior and exterior rehab. They approved the cargo door and the additional basement window. They do allow new windows and openings on primary elevations. And once again, it's a pragmatic approach. They didn't determine that a basement additional window necessarily damaged the historic integrity or elevation of the building. They also recognized that the cargo door and the opening there was not the original opening. So replacement of the probably 1960s aluminum door with a different door that had light coming through there was not a problem to them. And I just wanted to verify, though, that they are actually trained in the design review and the same guidelines that really this HPC looks at, the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Anyone else? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and see if there's any discussion or questions from my colleagues. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to grant the appeal.
Okay, thank you. Is there, Councilmember Frye?
Thank you, Councilmember Bender. So there are two options, there are two issues before us. The first is the door on the Second Street side. The present door is steel. It allows quite a bit of cold air into the inside. It frosts quite a bit, not to mention that door wasn't part of the original structure as we saw it was windows. So I am in favor of granting the appeal with regard to that issue. Is that all that's before us right now? Or are we dealing with the other one? You moved both, okay. The second one is with regard to the windows on the base level. And I do believe that, one, it will be an impediment to the pedestrian environment on the sidewalk. And two, I have concerns about going against the rules that we just set up through the St. Anthony Heritage Preservation Board. So I do not want to grant the appeal on that piece.
Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wish to move to separate the vote.
Councilmember Goodman.
I'm okay with that. My big issue is this door thing, and that I think that we're being completely unreasonable with it. And in fact, to get up and say that this is a National Historic Landmark of the highest significance, and then it turns out the building itself actually isn't, I think is a stretch, and it's annoying, to be honest, that I think it's almost like incorrect information to say that this is a huge deal when in fact it's not, which is what prompted my motion. I'm sympathetic to them actually on the second one as well, but I'll defer to Councilmember Frye.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and then separate the two items. So on item number A, so Councilmember Goodman, is it okay if we withdraw your original motion? Okay. So Councilmember Goodman has withdrawn the original motion. So I'll move on item number A to grant the appeal to allow the door. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. That motion carries. On item number B, which is to install the 3 windows, I will move to deny the appeal. Is there any discussion on that item? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, nay. That motion carries. So that completes item number 1. So item number 2 is a sign variance on 1313 5th Street Southeast. And again, we'll start with a presentation from staff.
Good morning, Chair Bender, committee members. The site located in Dinkytown is Zone C2 with the PO overlay and the UA overlay. Just for reference, the side of the site would be Dinkytown, the business district, and then we have residential across 14th Avenue and north across 6th Street. The comprehensive plan calls for mixed-use development on the site, and it is part of the activity center, which is indicated by the red line on the map on your screens. The use that occupies the site is the Marshall building, new development construction, a 4 to 7 story building, mixed use. It has commercial uses that are fronting along 5th Street, again facing the business district, and then the residential uses pretty much wrap the rest of the site, with the main residential entrance off of 14th Avenue. So the sign that is proposed would be located above that main residential entrance off of 14th Avenue. And you can see here in the picture, so this is 14th. This is the proposed sign. It is 113 square feet in area, 75 feet tall, measured above grade to the very top of the sign. The purpose of the sign, as it indicated, is to identify that primary residential entrance location. Just a little more detail on the signage itself. So what they're proposing is raised channel letters painted black with a white metal frame. These would be internally illuminated with LED lighting. So the sign is actually placed on a non-primary building wall where signage is not typically allowed. So that triggers the first variance to allow that signage. And since we don't allow signage on a non-primary building wall, they also need a variance for the sign area. The last variance is for the height. In the C2 district, a sign can be located up to 28 feet high on a building. This would be, as I mentioned, 75 feet above grade. Staff did recommend approval of these variances, finding that there were unique circumstances that were not created by the applicant. Those were related to the size of the property, the height of the structure, and the permitted sign area based on the length of the overall primary building wall, which is a whole block long. The site is 3.7 acres in size. As I mentioned, it has frontage on 3 streets, but only one of those frontages faces the Dinkytown Business District. And that, of course, is the frontage where the commercial uses in the development are oriented. Those other 2 frontages, again, they face residential, as does the primary residential entrance location. Again, as I mentioned before, the sign that's proposed is intended to face Dinkytown to indicate the location of that primary residential entrance, and it's intended to be an identifier for pedestrian traffic. Again, the site is located in an activity center, but it's not Zone C3A, where we wouldn't have a height restriction. So being in that C2, the height restriction applies. And they're not proposing to do signage beyond what's actually allowed for this site. Each of those 3 frontages is allowed to have signage. And just for comparison, off of 14th are allowed to have up to about 400 square feet of signage. And again, on 5th Street, they're allowed even more signage at about 770 square feet. 6th Street also has a large amount of signage that would be allowed, but they're well below what would be allowed overall. We've also found that oriented the sign to the business district would have less effect on the surrounding residential properties. We felt that the proposed signage would be consistent with the character of the property. It is internally illuminated. The metal sign with the raised channel letters is fitting with the character of the building, and also that this sign would not lead to visual clutter. It could be technically located closer to Dinkytown, but that's already where signage is proposed for the commercial uses. So the board, however, did not agree with the staff findings. So notwithstanding the staff recommendation, they did deny all 3 variances on a 4-2 vote. Their finding was that there are not circumstances unique to the property that has created a practical difficulty in complying with the ordinance. The applicant has proposed the structure and has created the circumstances. So that was their basis for denying these. But there are some other things that the board members did mention during the public hearing. One was the concerns about lighting, that there could be alternate sign locations for this sign. And, but again, they did acknowledge that there was some wayfinding that this signage would provide. So the original applicant that proposed the sign has appealed. And in summary, their reasons for the appeal are basically things I've already mentioned that we covered in the staff recommendation, but just the size, sign location, size and height are again intended to provide wayfinding, specifically oriented to pedestrians. They mentioned again the height, it's in an activity center, but not Zone C3, so therefore they're subject to that height restriction. And again, that the overall amount of signage proposed is less than what is allowed in this district. They did propose in some materials that you received today that they would be agreeable to a condition that would limit the amount of signage that they would put on 6th Street, which I mentioned is the primarily residential street. But I just received, and I'm not sure if you received this as well, an alternate condition of approval that could be added, and my understanding was that the neighborhood group had been involved in the wording of this, but essentially what they're saying is that no signs will be allowed on the 6th Street facade except for signage related to the garage entry, addressing, and similar auxiliary purposes. And my understanding is that the applicant is agreeable to that, so that would substitute what they had initially suggested. Some other items of note, the applicant did provide some more information on the LED lighting and also provided some additional renderings, which you should have received. The neighborhood group had sent their letter of objection again with stating the same reasons that they had provided to the Board of Adjustment. So I think that covers everything up to this point. I can take any questions and let me know if you need this language at all.
We have.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I'll have the appellant, which is also the applicant in this case, speak first and then open the public hearing.
Good morning, council members. I'm Carol Lansing, Bakery Baker Daniels, 90 South 7th Street, representing the owner, which is a Gem Realty, which was the original developer in partnership with EDR. Have you received a copy of the new condition of approval, which would be new this morning as opposed to the one you received yesterday?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
After the letters you got from both the neighborhood and me yesterday afternoon, Councilmember Fry suggested a condition of approval like this, which would only allow auxiliary type signage on the 6th Street facade, which is a long facade that faces an R2B neighborhood. It does not face the activity center. And Mr. Hung and Ms. Cam from the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association Land Use Committee are here. They were nice enough to meet with me after the board hearing, and we did exchange some more information about the sign, and I believe that they find this acceptable. So unless you have questions or want to hear more about this or any concerns about the sign, I will just leave it there and stand for questions.
Great. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, I will open the public hearing. We have 2 people signed up to speak. Why don't you come on up and state your name and address for the record? But you don't have to speak if you don't.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As Council Carol Lansing had stated, my name is Hung Russell. I am co-chair of Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association Land Use Committee, and we've had numerous discussions about the signage and some kind of late-breaking developments that she had outlined. We are now dropping our objections and agree with the conditions of approval that they're putting forth for this.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Kim? Okay. All right, would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else like to speak on this item? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. So there's a motion in front of the committee. So I would move to grant the appeal and adopt staff findings subject to the following additional condition imposed on variant C, that no signs be allowed on 6th Street Southeast facade except for signs related to the garage entry addressing and similar auxiliary purposes. Is there any comment or discussion on that item? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay, and that carries. All right, thank you. So moving on to item number 3. This is 2316, 2320 Colfax Avenue South, and we'll start with staff.
Morning, Madam Chair and council members. Appeal of the August 25th Planning Commission meeting to approve land use applications for the construction of a 42-unit building at 2316 to 2320 Colfax Avenue South. CPAD recommended approval of the 6 land use applications that were required, and the Planning Commission upheld those 6, the staff's recommendation on those 6 applications. The project site is in the Lowry Hill East neighborhood. It's at the northwest corner of Colfax Avenue and 24th Street. 2 blocks to the east of the Hennepin Avenue Commercial Corridor, 3 blocks to the west of the Lindale Avenue Commercial Corridor. Along 24th Street, which is also a thoroughfare through the neighborhood, with a major bus route going along 24th Street and an annual average daily traffic count of 3,200 cars. The project site is zoned R6, along with most of those properties between 24th Street and Franklin Avenue. As stated by the zoning code, the purpose of the R6 zoning district is to provide an environment of high-density apartments. For the features that are what's there today, and I drew a line on 24th Street showing that north of 24th Street, you do have a greater mix of apartment buildings and lower density houses. But to the south of 24th Street, there is a greater concentration of single 1- and 2-family homes. Currently on the site, two residential structures. As part of the project, those homes would be torn down. The review of the demolition or the preservation of these properties isn't part of the project that you're reviewing today, just the land use review of the new project. Okay, so 4-story building with a recessed 4th story, 42 apartments, main materials, brick and stucco with metal panel on that 4th floor. The front porches on the north end of the building, the north end of the building has that recessed portion of the building with the front porches to help blend in with the residential structures to the north. Mentioned there's 6 land use applications that were required. From the public comments, there were 2 that seemed to be the most confrontational, that being the front yard setback variance to reduce that from 19 feet to 15 feet to allow for the building and the front porches, and then to reduce the minimum parking requirement from 38 spaces to 27 spaces. I'll focus the last remaining time on those 2 applications. The other 3 applications that are part of this project are a rear yard setback to allow for a pergola, a reduction in drive aisle width of 2 feet, and a corner side yard setback to allow for a transformer. For the front yard setback variance, I have 3 lines on here. 1, the red line, that's the portion of the project that requires the variance. And that's the portion of the building that's 15 feet from Colfax Avenue. The blue line is how the building's set back to 21 feet, and that's 2.5 feet further behind the established front yard setback. And this property is zoned R6. Those residentially zoned districts have an established setback when you have a neighboring property that has a greater setback than the zoning district setback of 15 feet. You look to that neighboring structure, and that green line is representing a 19-foot setback for neighboring structure. So that is the established front yard setback for the project. All right, so once again, the red portion is the only portion that requires the variance, and CPED is supportive of the proposal, feeling that with the unique circumstances of this lot, there's an absence of an alley, and that greater front yard setback make it difficult to provide and have less real estate to provide all the zoning code requirements for a new development. The proposed design, CPED appreciates the proposed design and how they've transitioned from trying to transition better with the lower density residential structures to the north by having those open front porches and setting that portion of the building back further. And even though the building is set forward, the applicant is using the property in a reasonable manner. I've outlined a matrix of zoning code requirements that show how the building proposal is well below what could be allowed in an R6 district for gross floor area, for maximum floor area, or the floor area ratio, for height, lot coverage, and impervious surface, all well below what is allowed by the R6 district. And finally, along this point, it is not uncommon for apartment buildings at the corner of an intersection to be proud of the lower density structures that are on an interior lot. 3 examples, 3 early 1900 apartment building examples in the Lowry Hill East neighborhood is the northwest corner of 22nd Street West and Aldrich Avenue South, the northwest corner of 25th Street West and Colfax Avenue South, apartment building set forward of the lower density structure, and the southwest corner of 24th Street West and Harriet Avenue South. Moving to parking. Off-street parking requirement variance proposal is 38 spaces to 27 off-street parking spaces. And CPED is supportive of this proposal. The applicants with the given location and the applicant's proposal to promote alternative transportation. This is one of the most walkable areas in the city, being so close to 2 major commercial corridors, walking distance to the Hennepin Lake Activity Center. The project site also has great access for bikes. 24th Street is a common bikeway, as well as Bryant Avenue, 1 block to the east, and great access to transit. Number 6 and number 17 are within 2 blocks of the site. So the applicant's proposal also helps reduce the need to own a vehicle with a shared vehicle on site and a bike transit center. Their long-term biking proposal well exceeds what is required, and they have bike parking right on the main floor to provide easy access. In addition, transit passes are being included within rent, with rent, and they're offering a rent reduction. They're proposing to allow a rent reduction if you do not have a vehicle. CPED provided 3 conditions of approval for the parking variance that the Planning Commission upheld. The final plan shall include the additional compact parking spaces as proposed. A space shall be dedicated for the shared vehicle on the final site plan, floor plans, and the proposed project shall provide no less than the proposed 48 bike parking spaces that meet the zoning code's requirements for long-term parking. And that the bike transit center shall be maintained in the final construction plans that will allow for a space for residents to complete bike repairs. So I focused on those 2 variances that I thought were the most computational from the comments, but I'll be happy to answer questions about these or other parts of the proposal.
Are there any questions for staff? I believe the Planning Commission also added a condition that was not recommended by staff regarding the building materials. Could you just briefly summarize that? Wasn't there a condition added to replace the lap siding with stucco from the Planning Commission, if I recall?
Thank you, Councilmember Bender. Yes, CPED did recommend that so I have on this, the south elevation, this facing 24th Street, east elevation facing Colfax Avenue. Both of these have stucco and brick. On the north elevation, they originally were proposing to have lap siding on, as well as stucco and brick. The condition of approval is that lap siding be replaced with stucco on both elevations to have just 2 primary materials on all 4 elevations.
Thank you. Any further questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I will ask the folks who've appealed to come up and speak first, and then we'll have the applicant speak, and then we'll open the public hearing.
Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be heard. My name is Sally Witham, and I live at 1011 West 24th Street. The picture up here is a picture of 2320 Colfax taken from the sidewalk in front of my house. A variance for city green space requirements is a challenge for me to accept when, as a direct neighbor, I have an opportunity to speak up. I'm concerned about the environment and the standards being allowed to change or vary for the sake of an increase in population density. I'm concerned about adding more people while removing green space. The added runoff has direct effect upon the good health of our chain of lakes and our available underground water supplies. If green space requirements continue to shrink when high-density, primarily one-bedroom apartment buildings with flat roofs are built in the wedge, it seems critical that there be green roof requirements going forward. Please do not allow variances for green space in an already dense neighborhood. This includes the shrinking of the tree island and the yard space. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Good morning. 저는 피터 김이고 2254 Colfax Avenue에 삽니다.
My name is Peter Kim, and I live in the 2204 Colfax Avenue South.
미니애폴리스 시민으로 조닝 앤 플래닝 베리언스 과정의 완전성, 투명성 그리고 논리성을 기대합니다.
As a resident in Minneapolis, I would expect that integrity, transparency, and logical process in zoning and planning process.
이 파킹 베리언스는 프랙티컬 디피컬티가 존재하지 않으므로 30% 주차 의무 완화에 대해 다음과 같이 이의를 제기합니다.
I have 3 reasons to oppose the reduction of the parking requirements.
첫 번째, 시가 개인의 차 소유권을 제한할 수 없습니다.
First of all, the city cannot restrict ownership of an individual car vehicle.
두 번째, 렌터의 차 소유 유무를 예측할 만한 자료가 없습니다.
And there is not enough evidence or data to expect how many cars the renters will own on the average.
차 공유 프로그램 아워카의 적은 주차 공간을 보장하지 못하는데도 시는 월권을 행사하고 있으며 개발자의 이익에 치우친 우선권을 주고 있습니다.
I feel strongly about the fact that city is overstepping its authority to give unacceptable preference to the developer despite the car sharing program like our car cannot guarantee less parking requirements.
사실 2010년에 뉴욕에서도 비슷한 사례가 있었는데 시는 주차 공간 의무를 그대로 지켜냈습니다.
Matter of fact, there was an incident in the city of New York in 2010 with a similar scenario, and the city council decided there is no need for reduction of the parking requirement.
아메리칸 커뮤니티 조사에 의하면 로리 힐리스 네이버후드의 차 무소유 가정은 18%이며 한차 가정은 56%, 2차 소유 가정은 19%, 그리고 4.7%가 3대 이상의 차를 가지고 있습니다.
Thirdly, according to the Laurel Hill East Neighborhood Association survey, there is 18% of the household do not own a car, but there is 56.5% owns at least one car each household, and 19.9% has 2 cars, and 47% has 3 or more car ownership. 4.7 has more than 3 or more cars.
이 자료에 근거하면 48대 주차 공간이 필요하고 21대 24의 차가 거리 주차에 의지하게 됩니다.
Based on this data, we need 48 parking spaces. Out of that, 21 has to rely on street parking.
콜팩스는 엘리가 없고 많은 커브 컷이 있어 주차 공간이 매우 한정되어 있습니다.
Colfax Avenue has no alleyways, and there is many curb cuts, so that it restricts street parking spaces.
이 방의 어느 누구도 시민의 차 소유 경향을 예측하지 못하는 상황에서 30%의 주차 의무 완화는 실험입니다.
This is a kind of experiment that is not proven, has no proven ground to reduce 30% ownership of the car.
리나는 실험실이 아닙니다.
The Lena, this community, is not laboratories to test any theory.
특히 신뢰할 수 있는 조사가 그 반대 성향을 나타내는 상황에서
Especially when there is the proof and the evidences pointing to other directions.
제발 검증된 자료에 기초한 논리적이고 이성적인 판단을 해주십시오.
I would like to ask you to go through the rational and logical decision on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The rest of the folks from the appellant, from the appeal are welcome to speak if you'd like.
Good morning, Madam Chair and council members. I'm Danforth Fleek, the resident property owner at 2217 Colfax Avenue South, a 3-unit building which is 200 feet from the proposed building. I want to be clear first that this appeal is not intended to be anti-growth or anti-development. I am a business owner and a property owner, and despite the fact that this building would be in direct competition with my rental units, I do not oppose this development now, and I have not in the past. My participation in this appeal is because I believe that the parking variance will have a negative impact on my block, which will directly impact my ability to find and retain tenants. In 11 years, I've shown my rental units to what must be approaching 100 people. Overwhelmingly, the first question they ask me after seeing the unit is about parking. My fellow appellant has covered parking from a general standpoint. I want to discuss the specifics. 24th Street is the only east-west street from Franklin Avenue to Lake and Lagoon Streets that has no stop signs and is not a one-way. Because of this, it is heavily traveled and creates a natural barrier. People who live north of 24th Street highly prefer to park north of it to avoid having to cross the busy street with no traffic control. The public parking on 24th Street itself is on the south side only, which also makes this undesirable. The most desirable public parking for this building will be on the block of Colfax between 24th Street and 22nd. And the natural overflow from this block would be north on Colfax and east or west on 22nd. Two of these, north on Colfax and west on 22nd, are one-way, which make it difficult to get back should a person not find parking. I've thought long and hard as to the particular difficulties that this property has that require this variance. As it stands, I see only two options for myself if it stands: suffering through the additional difficulty of renting my units or incurring considerable expense to create additional off-street parking on my property. And I find neither of those agreeable. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Goodman has a question.
Sure.
I'm just wondering, for your building, how many units is it?
3.
And how many parking spaces do you have?
I have 3 off-street.
So 1 per 1.
Correct.
And so you have enough for your building, basically?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
I do, but 2 of my units have multiple cars, so they park on the street.
So you're at 1 for 1? You're at 1 for 1, your own building?
Yes, yep.
Okay, Mr. Wells.
Good morning, council members. My name is William Wells, 2838 Fremont Avenue South of Minneapolis. I've been a renter in South Minneapolis for 5 years, and I support the appeal before you this morning. We're a group of very concerned neighbors who are going to be negatively impacted by the proposed variances if the project is allowed to move forward as it is currently designed. We're not anti-growth and we're not anti-city improvement. We're not anti-bikes. Our concern is the variances. We are just appealing the variances as they're having a negative impact. We believe the variances and the design of this building has been such that the variances are only for the financial gain of the developer, but have no specific public good for our community. We believe there is no specific hardship to allow all of these variances. We are specifically appealing the parking variance, in which the developer proposes to build market rate housing units of a project that is mostly 1-bedroom units and does not provide the code minimum parking of 1 space per unit. As the staff report clearly states, the project is not on a transit corridor. It's not on a transit corridor. It's in the core of the neighborhood, and this project is not affordable housing. This is market rate housing. The parking variance will lead to residents and guests parking on the public street. This variance is being requested by the developer solely for economic gain so he can build more 1-bedroom units. To be sure, the developer could easily meet the zoning code by changing the unit mix and building more 2- and 3-bedroom units. The developer's proposal to demolish the existing affordable housing on site and create a new development of market rate 1-bedroom units with the required parking on the public street is not a variance we support. We strongly question the livability of some of the 1-bedroom units on the ground floor, as they are only 12 feet wide in some areas. We strongly are concerned about the parking within the interior of the building, as shown on this diagram, in which the cars actually park up adjacent to the entry. We don't see any ADA accessibility. We're very concerned about this design. We think there's too many 1-bedroom units being crammed into this development. We ask for your support today to deny the variances.
Okay, thank you. So that now we'll have the original applicant speak, and then we'll open the public hearing.
Good morning. Good morning, council members. My name is Pete Keeley with Collage Architects. I'm here representing the Lander Group. Tony Correa, also with the Lander Group, is here to answer some questions along with the property owner, Mike Crow. I want to start with a couple of responses or some ideas where we started with the building originally and on the variances, and then I want to answer some of the questions directly raised by the appellants. I think first of all, the setback issue. So the building, as was pointed out by staff, this is the overlay. In the orange is the building. The dashed line, it indicates where we could build to, including all the way to the western edge of the site. I want to note that we looked at the fabric of the neighborhood. I really tried to address how the neighborhood was set up. The setback is actually greater than it needs to be along the north half. and less on the south half. And that's taking on the pattern in the neighborhood that the streets and the blocks, as they go in the east-west direction along the commercial corridors, tend to be much closer to the street, as evidenced by the fact across on 24th, some of the setbacks are 5 feet. The setback along the reduction from 19 feet to 15 feet actually complies with the R6 zoning. What it does not comply with is this established setback along Colfax. However, we are a greater distance from the established setback than would be required. This is not about square footage. Actually, if we built to that setback line, we would have more square footage on the site and therefore more economic gain. This was about patterns in the neighborhood and trying to offset the two buildings for two reasons. One, the established pattern, and two, to create two different distinct forms of the building. One is the brick box, one is the stucco box. So by doing that, it breaks down and reduces the scale of the building into two identifiable parts, we believe more in context and in keeping with the neighborhood and the building. The other setbacks I'll cover real quick. The west side setback is literally for a pergola. It is 4 columns. Those are steel columns that will hold a green screen, essentially a set of wires. We believe this whole project was set up to reduce the impact of the car from a number of varieties, and this is one of them. The impact of the car along that western edge was to be able to provide that green screen, ivy that could grow up and over, and to minimize the actual asphalt to it. In addition to that, were some tree grates. We are not required to put trees within the parking area. However, we believe that the growth and the canopy of the trees is a benefit to the neighborhood and a benefit to the residents. So there's been some concern about the tree grate and the tree grate size. We do have a smaller tree grate size, but we do have pervious pavers around that are 8 feet by 8 feet. We also have recycled rainwater that's going to be a drip irrigation system into the tree areas. So those trees, we're very concerned about the health of the trees. So by providing the pervious pavers and the drip irrigation system with the recycled rainwater, we're actually providing additional stormwater quality to the project, and we're providing for the health of the trees. With the stormwater quality, there's actually less runoff from the site than there is right now. And I know one of the speakers spoke about stormwater quality. All of those have increased. We are certainly going to meet the city of Minneapolis standards. We're going to meet the watershed standards. Because this is a flat roof building, we are taking the stormwater, we're putting them in chambers and meeting the quality controls and the rate controls that are not in place on the property right now. As far as the minimizing the impact of the car, this is where the project had started, is we took a look at what the demographics of the neighborhood were and who was living here. I know the study that was put in front of you showing however many cars per household by the Lena study it's maybe a demographic that is not what we're looking for in this project. It's a demographic of homeowners and everyone throughout the neighborhood. The homeowners that we have, the renters that are coming in, are looking for what we believe is a lifestyle that is more affordable. Now, we've never called this affordable housing. This is not affordable housing, but we are looking at a lifestyle that can be more affordable. So when you're looking at what it takes to be affordable, a big one is the cost of the rent. So what we're doing to that is we are minimizing some of the units to try to keep the rent structure low. In addition to that, we are taking the savings from not doing the underground parking and the minimizing of the parking directly back into the envelope of the building, the systems of the building, and the transit. Because the other two big components of how people live in terms of cost are energy and transportation. And so the building goes from what on average is an R14 wall, which is standard construction, to about an R24 wall. We have increased energy efficiencies in the windows. We have increased envelope insulation. We have an increased mechanical system. So this building does not have magic packs. It has a more efficient centralized system. And because of this, neighbors, everyone within the neighborhood is not going to see the ugly magic pack grills on the outside of the wall. We are using the dollars to kind of offset that. It does help the look, but it also significantly helps the rent. And then finally, the parking issue and the cost of the car is the ability to not have a car is one of the biggest costs in somebody's lifestyle. So we are providing for that option. And the provision that we are doing is trying to make biking as appealing as possible to the level of putting actual access right on the street. So the access, grab them. This location right here, this is actually the access. There are bike garage doors. There's a maintenance facility for bicycles. There's 3 types of storage facilities for the bike. Within this location, people can open a garage door and exit right out. There's a wash drain. People can wash it in the wintertime. We're recognizing a different type of profile of what a biker is, and there's people that bike year-round. So we're trying to make that as appealing as possible. In addition to that, using the dollars to provide the transit incentives, which is transit passes and also a reduction in rent for not having a vehicle. So we're trying to provide for those. We are also, what comes up in this is the requirement is 38. This is not considered a transit development because one of the bus stops in one of the directions is 340 feet and not 300 feet. Yet it doesn't recognize the fact that Hennepin and Lindale are easy walking distance to this location, in addition to goods and services. This is one of the most walkable neighborhoods around. And so regardless of what the policy in that reduction says, this is a walkable neighborhood and has a high transit component.
Mr. Keeley, Councilmember Goodman has a question.
Yes.
I think this is a pretty transit-friendly location. It reminds me a lot of Loring Park, where I lived for 20 years. But what happens if people do have cars and there's not enough parking for the unit per car? Is the suggestion just, well, you'll have to park on the street? Are they saying they're only going to rent to people who don't have cars? You're only going to rent the units to people who don't have cars? Because, I mean, I think about the neighborhood. I grew up in Loring Park, where I lived in many buildings without parking, and all that does is create a pressure on all the rest of the parking in the immediate area. So I'm just wondering how you're going to get these people to come who won't have cars, and what happens when you hit 27 of them and then there's still units left. Because I don't buy the argument that you're providing an option for people who don't have a car. What that means to me is you're not building parking. I'm not sure what option you're providing for people that don't have a car, other than we're not providing you a parking space if you need one. So we had this debate in my ward over the high-rise Loring Park apartments. They underbuilt the parking, and they had an arrangement with the Hyatt that if they were unable to have enough parking in their building, the overflow would go to the Hyatt. Have you given any thought to what kind of private overflow option there would be other than parking on the street?
Certainly have given some thought to it. We don't have answers in terms of an agreement with someone else, but there are part of the reduction of 5 stalls is because there's a more compact stalls. So the actual number of stalls is 32 stalls. And so those 5 stalls do not count, but they are required in the final set of plans. So the actual number is 32 stalls, not 27. So if we as a private development entity, we're very motivated to have the numbers correct, because then we don't rent units. And so if the people come and they can't park, that's also our problem. Now there's limited parking on the street, I think, as everybody knows. And so we believe that the risk actually comes back to the rental of these buildings and of these units. And that's a risk that comes back on the development entity. Because of that, so that's why we're trying to put in place the transit incentives, the shared vehicle on site. We have reached out to Our Car. Our Car does have 3 locations in the nearby area. We have directly discussed this site with them. They are looking for more sites. There's a site available on the back side of that we're planning on having part of this plan. And if it's not Our Car, we're going to go to Car2Go and try to get that shared vehicle on site. And we believe the changing demographic of that really supports the idea that there's a reduction in parking.
Well, I do agree with you that you take on some of the risk, but I think about all the buildings built in the 1900s, 1920s. They built those buildings. There are no parking. The risk is you drop the price, and then the price becomes more affordable, and then you get more affordable housing. And then you get a person who has affordable housing who has a car on the street. So there is some risk, but there's also risk on the other end of it, that the unit drops in price, it becomes affordable, and someone comes anyway and says, I'll hassle with the parking. Right, so 32 units, 32 parking spaces, 40 units?
42 units, 32 parking stalls, although 27 of those parking stalls are in the count.
Thank you.
So what is the parking ratio if you include the compact spaces? If 42 units, and how many total parking spaces?
It's about 0.75 to 1.
0.75, okay, thank you.
and the 0.75 is also based on what the management company has found in their urban locations. They own a number of properties in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and have found that they're actually under that number. So their real-time thing is that number of people don't have cars, and there more and more people coming up who are renting these units. There's less and less cars every day. So what we're looking at today, this building's going to be here for a long time. We're putting in very high energy efficiency. We're putting in very quality materials. I know there was a concern on the appellant side about the quality of materials. This is brick and stucco. Brick and stucco are very predominant building materials, and they're kind of high quality, and they're located in the neighborhood. So we believe that's very positive. Even in terms of the units, I know where there is some concern on the unit layout and design. Again, I would say that is certainly our risk. And I don't know if there's, let's see, where's the zoom? So this is actually that unit in question that was being referred to as being too narrow. This is actually a one bedroom. That's about a 14 by 30 foot, 28 foot great room, which was one of the concerns. Another of the concern are these two end units. This is actually a 2-bedroom unit. Again, it's got a great room that's probably 28 by 32, so quite large bedrooms, 2-bedroom split units. The doors on the back side of this are really for private access, so for those individual units, but the main access is off the front door. The intent was to put doors on the street, put access on the street to kind of have the same pattern of living that is in the neighborhood. People don't go through their corridors, they go through the front door. So, and I believe, I'm sure there may be a few other questions. Happy to answer some. I guess one of the last and final ones on the transformer is this is the existing transformer that is sitting on the property line, a little bit inside the property line. That transformer needs to move. We've contacted XL, but they're not going to work with us until there's a project here to actually talk about to where that could move or how that could happen. So we've basically, within this application, is to move the transformer, this one right here, potentially to right there, if we can't get it on the back end of the site. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know Mr. Correa from the Lander Group has more information. If you want to talk to him, he has more details on the hour car and where the status of that as well.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So now we'll open the public hearing. How many people would like to speak? Okay, why don't we go ahead, since we've just heard from the applicant, have the folks who are here to speak in favor of the project speak first. Try not to be redundant to each other. And when you speak, we'll give you 2 minutes each. State your name and address for the record, and then we'll move to the folks opposed. And then the applicant does have the right to speak at the end if they'd wish. So come on up.
Good morning. Chair Bender, council members, my name is Bert Coffin. I live at 2845 Colfax Avenue South. I've been a member of the Lowry Hill East Neighborhood Association board since about 2011. And for one of those years, I chaired the Z&P committee there. We've had at least 2 meetings, public meetings, where we've had extensive public comment on this project. And we had spirited conversations about the project, the pros and cons of it. And it was really good, and it hashed a lot of stuff out there, but it was apparent that there is a lot of support in the neighborhood for the project. In the end, the board itself did not take a vote on the project, decided to for one way or the other, so they did not take a stand on the project. Supporters of the project and myself really think that this project will have a positive impact on our community. It will replace a property that has not been kept in the best of repair in the last few years. We think it will bring some vitality to this corner in an appropriate way through good design. And when I say good design, I'm thinking of some of these things. We think the scale works really well. It's really a 3-story building, and then the 4th story is set back quite a bit and treated a bit more like an attic level. Front porches are part of this design, which are super important to me as a designer and give the building really that connection to the historic fabric of the community and the homes that are around there. High quality materials are used in a skillful way to create a softer background building of high quality that doesn't really compete with its neighbors. It's not a building that's trying to be historicist like its neighbors. It's really trying to be more of a background and let the other buildings around it stand out. We think that the large windows are a really positive aspect and put eyes on the street for the project. It's also, as Pete said and others have said, it really is truly a TOD, transit-oriented development that really leverages existing transit connections, high-quality bicycle connections to downtown, and other transit resources. We think it's especially commendable that this project is reducing its carbon footprint by reducing its on-site parking count in exchange for transit incentives and other sustainable features that have been added back into the building. And lastly, the project brings new construction into the neighborhood at a more affordable price point than what is being offered in other parts of the neighborhood. So for these reasons, I ask that you support this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Come on up. Who's next?
Good morning. My name is Jana Flisrand, and I am also a landlord located about a block away from this project at 2112 DuPont Avenue South. Appellant Danforth Fleek was a tenant of mine, actually, when I moved in 18 years ago. And at that time, it's a 4-unit building. There are 9 bedrooms in the building. And at that time, I don't know exactly how, but had space for about 8 cars on my site, and my parking was always in high demand. That has changed dramatically in the 18 years that I've lived in that building. Today, and this is true for the last 5 years, I do not have more than 1 car for all of the residents in my building. I cannot fill the 4 parking spaces that are on my site. I am only able to rent those out to other people in 100-year-old buildings that have no parking a block or 2 blocks away. So I've noticed a significant and very dramatic change in the last 18 years in the transportation habits of the people living in the neighborhood. I also will say that I'm really pleased about the opportunity for more affordability. Covered parking is an extraordinarily expensive thing to include in an apartment building. And so while I think it is important to have adequate parking in apartment buildings, I work in the area of affordable housing, and I want to make sure that we're right-sizing the parking rather than unnecessarily requiring more parking than is necessary. So again, it's incredibly important to get the right amount of parking in a building. There was recently a change on my street. I live near many of the new restaurants that are opened at Hennepin and Franklin, and one side of my street went from being free on-street parking all of the time to having 2-hour parking throughout the entire day. That was upsetting to some of my tenants, and it was maybe no surprise how quickly they got used to that change. The one tenant who had the 1 car was really upset about it. And within a month, got used to that and no longer had any challenges in finding on-street parking. So I wish my car-free amenities were as great as this property. They're not. I still have no problem finding units or finding tenants for my units. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Andrew Degerstrom, 2849 Irving Avenue South, Apartment 3. So I live in a 3rd floor attic conversion. Tenants like me, or renters like me, are looking for rentals that are considered more affordable. I mean, we can't always afford the luxuries of that you'll find at some of the new projects like Flux or any of the other ones along the Greenway. I'm just going to say why I'm really supportive of this development, and it's because of the incentives to have alternative modes of transportation. So all the bike parking on site, as well as the shared bike repair facility and the shared car on site, the opportunity for rent reduction for not having a car. I can say at my building, we do not have all of our parking spaces utilized. Not everyone in my building. There's 4 units, 4 spots. Only 3 are occupied at the moment. The tenant on the second floor, he does not have a car. So there really is precedent for this decline in car ownership and desire to have a car. And finally, I really love the idea of the transit pass as included in the rent. That's something that's hasn't really been seen at all. In East Isles, I'm chair of the Transportation Committee, and I'll tell you that we are very interested in looking into the possibility of offering transit passes to our residents. So to see this kind of happen in an actual specific project is really exciting. So I would urge you to deny the appeals and support the project today. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, for your time.
Thank you. The next person? Is there anyone left who wants to speak in favor of the project? Then those who are opposed to the project or have comments, come on up.
Hi, my name is Sarah Lynn Romanishin, and I live at 2111 Aldridge Avenue South, 2 blocks from the development. I agree with the previous testimony supporting the appeal and add my thoughts on variances and the irresponsible way they are applied by the Planning Commission. On August 25th, the Planning Commission heard the application for 2316 and 2320 Colfax. At that meeting, 23 variances were heard, including those by the applicant, and all were approved. This year alone, the Planning Commission has had 118 requests for variances. They have approved 91 as of the September 15th meeting. That's 91. Out of the 6 denied so far this year, 5 are signage requests. Apparently in Minneapolis, signage undergoes more scrutiny than the buildings themselves. The state says zoning is for the purpose of promoting the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. These variances do none of the above. It also says the regulations shall be uniform for each class or kind of building, structure, or land, and for each class or kind of use throughout such district. This district is R6, and these variances do not fit into the R6 Uniform Code. The criteria for the application of variances must apply. 1, practical difficulties. No, these variances exist solely due to economic considerations. 2, use the property in a reasonable manner that will be in keeping with the spirit and intent of the ordinance. Again, no, the ordinances are 6. 3, the variance will not alter the essential character of the locality or be injurious to the use or enjoyment of other property in the vicinity. Yes, it will. The requested variances say it all. It is not the job of the Planning Commission and the City Council to grant the wish list of developers, but to abide by the law and to apply the law to the developers. A variance authorized in the city's ordinances does not mean it is in accordance with section 525.500. Variances are meant to be exceptions to the rule, not the rule itself. Please support the appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person.
Madam Chair and Committee, I am Anders Christensen. I live at 4347 Garfield Avenue South in the Kingfield neighborhood. I have appeared before you to advocate for the preservation of the Orth House, a recognized Minneapolis historic resource. Today I stand before you to advocate for the 25 residents who call 2316 and 2320 Colfax Avenue South home. These residents are low income and in many cases vulnerable adults. If you approve this project and all of its variances, what happens to these people, these renters? Variances are by statute to serve public purposes. These variances serve only the developer's bottom line. We know that the tenants will not find housing in Uptown and the 10th Ward. Do they move to the 4th Ward? Do they move to the 1st Ward? Do they move to the 6th ward? Do they end up in the shelters, which are already at capacity? Do they end up on the streets? Do you recognize your responsibility for what happens to them? We know that the county and the taxpayers will be responsible financially. There is much talk in municipal political circles about equity. This project is blatant gentrification. It displaces long-term, low-income wedge renters who have limited options, and there is no plan for what will become of them. Please, do the right thing, do the decent thing, do the prudent thing. Vote to uphold the appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person.
Good morning. I see some familiar, friendly faces. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Meg Tuthill. I live at 2420 Bryant South, right around the corner from this proposed project. There's a couple things that I want to point out to you this morning that I think are really important. Some of them come from my 45 years in the neighborhood, and some of them come as my term as on the city council here. The northern part of our neighborhood, because of the lack of alleys, has much more limited parking, than I have in front of my house because of the driveways that have been built. In my tenure as on the city council, many calls, especially in the winter, because the parking is aggressively enforced by police and fire of the blockage of overhanging on to the driveways. People are getting tagged continually and they get very upset. So that's part of what the problem is for the limited parking on the northern end of the neighborhood. And I think that's got to be taken into consideration when you have the alley cut or the driveway cuts that the rest of the neighborhood or many neighborhoods in Minneapolis do not have. The other thing is that the developers talking about if there's not enough parking, it's back on us. Baloney, they're gone. They're gone. It's back on the residents and the new people that are trying to move in. We have a duplex next door to me, great duplex. 6 people in that, in that duplex, 5 cars, 5. The other tenant that doesn't have one is in the process of buying. So buying the fact that we're projecting people to live here without cars is absolutely a wonderful goal. It's great in theory. It is not reality right now. We've got to figure out what to do. The other thing is when we're talking about variances that concerns me with parking, snow storage. I cannot tell you the calls that came into my office when I was a council member in the winter when we had the big boon of condominiums, apartment buildings being turned into condominiums. People, neighbors were screaming and hollering because the snow's either plowed back into an alley or blown into the neighbors, or what's being done in this property right now, plowed across the street into 24th Street. There's no accommodations. No one's talking about snow storage and snow removal. That is absolutely imperative, especially in neighborhoods with high density, especially in neighborhoods that have good transportation, which we have. People trying to crawl over the snow banks that are now mounted up onto the boulevards and falling over onto the sidewalks. I think that those are some of the things that are of most concern to me when it comes to allowing the reduced parking. The ordinance says 1 for 1. 23 variances really in a residential area that has the highest residential zoning the city allows, and we're going to do a variance on that already. That just seems unconscionable to me. Please deny the variances that this developer is looking for and protect the betterment of this community. We have the density that everybody dreams of. We are happy to have it. We moved in knowing it, but we've got to be prudent and be realistic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else to testify on this item? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing and see if there's any discussion. Let's see. I have to find my, okay. So I'm going to move to deny the appeal. I live just around the corner from here, so I'm happy to speak on this issue. I've talked to a lot of people, a lot of my neighbors, and I can say that the parking issue, as you saw today from the hearing, is it's something that people are split on. But we are talking about this development in the context of developing a neighborhood, in the context of developing our city. And I see, and I know from research, just attended a conference for a few days last week, and there's a lot of research that shows changing demographics, that details the dramatic decrease in car using that we've seen, especially in the next generations that are coming in. And there's almost an obsession every time I go to a policy discussion these days, and how do we attract millennials to our city? And I think the best way to talk about that and decide is to talk to millennials and ask them what they want. And what the research is showing is that they don't want to drive. They want to live in a walkable urban environment. This neighborhood has one of the highest walk scores in the city. That's why I chose to live here. And because we can walk my daughter to school, I bike to work, I take the bus, I walk to the grocery store. A lot of my neighbors do that, and I know that from talking with them. And so I want to acknowledge that certainly not everyone feels that way, and there are absolutely people who feel that we should add more parking than is even required. But we have such a small percentage of our city that is on the kind of transit corridor that we have here. It's not fixed rail, I wish it was, but there's a high frequency bus to the university. There's the 6, the 4, the 17, all within walking distance. I know because I walk to them. And, we have such a small percentage of the land in our city that has this kind of transit access. I just saw some amazing research done in Boston, where they showed they have 6% of their land in Boston that is considered high frequency transit. And they found that if you build a typical development there with the typical parking that you see in other neighborhoods, people don't take transit. They drive at the same rates as others. But if you build transit-oriented development, that reduces the amount of cars that are there. People self-select. And the many, many people who are choosing to live without cars, we see that the neighborhood has a higher percentage of people than the city that have fewer cars than other neighborhoods. One car. Equal numbers, 20% of people have no cars in the neighborhood today. Well, we will see that people will self-select. And I understand people's concern that there will be on-street parking, but frankly, that's kind of the evolution of the city. When I lived in Loring Park, I didn't have a car because there was nowhere to park it. And so we self-selected to live in that neighborhood where it wasn't convenient to own a car and we didn't own one. So I strongly support the parking variance. I think it is part of the evolution of the neighborhood and the city. And I absolutely don't think we should be requiring the market to build more parking than they want to. It's Minnesota. People are going to park on the street and have their snow covered car. Investors wouldn't build buildings without parking if they thought it was going to be so inconvenient for their residents. So with that, I'll see what Councilmember Goodman has to say.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with you. And I'm going to make my position pretty clear on this. I completely oppose the demolition of the Orth House. This is a totally different situation. Getting up and talking about how many variances the Planning Commission has approved is not relevant to these specific variances. Getting up and making the argument that poor people are going to be moved because of gentrification is not relevant to these variances. All we have in front of us essentially is the testimony by Councilmember Tuthill, which is that the parking variance in and of itself is going to change the essential character of the neighborhood. And to some extent, I do agree with you on that. But I have a long history of asking developers in my ward to build less parking. And I think that that's something that we need to be looking really hard at. I have advocated for us to have maximum parking requirements and have them be low rather than minimum. And I think in this particular situation, the architect made his case. I didn't agree with the way you phrased it. I essentially think what you said was, you're going to provide for the option of no car. Well, that just means you're not building parking. So I don't know how you can spin that any better than you're providing not enough parking, but you're going to have to take the risk on that. And people who move into your building are going to have to determine if they can tolerate what I think is kind of an intolerable situation in that location north of 21st as it pertains to the parking. The variances that have to do with the utility box, the pergola, the setbacks for the front yard, that's not even defensible to come in and say those are bad things. These are good things. We want them to have a setback that's bigger, closer to the houses. We want them to put a pergola in the back. We'd love for them to move the utility boxes. So the parking is really the only one where I think we can kind of have a difference of opinion. And in this situation, it's not like they're asking for 15 spaces and they have 42 units. They're asking for 10 less than 1 per 1. And in this location, there's probably a number of historic buildings that have 0, which puts a lot of pressure on the area. But in the end, I think we want to see less parking in these really dense locations, which is just like where I used to live in Loring Park. And I think that these are variances that are justifiable, despite the fact that I am very open to the idea of denying a variance. I don't think it makes sense in this particular situation.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I agree with Councilmember Goodman, but I disagree about the parking issue. And I guess it is just my experience in driving in that neighborhood that it is a challenge, particularly in the winter. And for me, I'm not a millennial, and I think one of the things we have to think about for our city is do we change the essential nature of our community to accommodate a demographic blip that will move through their lifestyle, and their needs will change. What I wanted when I was 20 years old and 30 years old is different than the lifestyle that I have now and what I want now. So I want to split these up, and I'm probably the only one, but I'd like to just say that I'm going to vote no on the parking variance.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I previously have lived in Uptown before, and I remember parking blocks away, having to park blocks away because there was no parking nearby my place. But it was one of those trade-offs. It was a wonderful place to live at the time. I really enjoyed it. It was close to everything. There was great transit. Go down to the lakes pretty easily, and a lot of friends living in the area too. And that's just a trade-off with where you live, and people are going to have to weigh the pros and cons. I mean, when you have that kind of density, you're never going to have enough parking on the street for everyone to have a car, and that's just the way it is. And so people need to make that decision if they're willing to walk several blocks on most days to get to their place, or if they value parking, they're going to go someplace where they can get it, where they have a dedicated spot, and where they're possibly paying a premium for that.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, I will withdraw my original motion, and then I will move to deny the appeal for variances A, B, D, E, and F. So that's everything but the parking. Any discussion? All those, or maybe we should, clerk, could you please call the roll on these?
Councilmember Goodman. Andrew Johnson. Barbara Johnson.
Aye.
Reich. Morsami. Chair Bender. That's 6 votes aye.
Okay, thank you. And then I will also move to deny the appeal of variance C, which is the parking. And please call the roll.
Councilmember Goodman. Andrew Johnson. Barbara Johnson.
No.
Reich. Morsami. Chair Bender. That's 5 ayes and 1 nay.
Okay, so both of those carry, and that is the end of our agenda for today. So we are adjourned. Thank you.